Okay, so now we can go over to Annotate and it'll let us add in some headlines and descriptions and other information for our graphic. So we're going to go ahead and give our graphic a headline, just a nice descriptive headline to let people know what they're looking at. So the graphic is showing heat-related deaths in Maryland and Baltimore. Now we're going to add a description that's going to drill down a little bit and let people know what this graphic says or what the data says, right? So heat-related deaths in Maryland and Baltimore, and then for our description, it's going to say Baltimore has more than its share of heat-related deaths in Maryland. And finally, we want to make sure we add a source, and in this case, the source is the Maryland Department of Health. And we can also add a link to our data source, which is a really great thing to do. In this case, this is data that we collected from a few different places, so we don't have a good link to add. You can also add notes if you need to. So you can say note here, right? So if you needed to, make a little asterisk or some other information about the graphic that you wanted people to know, there's a space for that. And finally, we can add a byline. I'll add my name there. You can see it went ahead and added the byline and the source down here at the bottom. Finally, Datawrapper will highlight certain elements for us if we want. So for instance, we can see 2012 was the year with the most deaths. Maybe we wanted to highlight 2012. Also maybe we'd want to highlight the most recent year. Or maybe we don't really want to highlight any at all. We just want to let people sort of look at the data and come to their own conclusions. All right, so nice simple bar graph, pretty good shape here. There's also this design tab, which will let you choose a couple different layouts, which are basically just like templates that will change the way the graphic looks a little bit. I almost always just leave it on this regular Datawrapper with data layout, which I think is the best way to go. Also under this tab we have this nice enable social sharing button, and when we click that it'll add some share buttons to our graphic, which is always a good thing to do. And we can just say share site chart is embedded in, and so it'll go ahead and share the page in which we embed the chart, which is ultimately what we want. Okay, so this is in good shape, right? This is a nice simple bar chart that we can go ahead and publish for use on CNS. So if we click publish, you can see this is going to give us some options. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and click publish, and it will publish the chart. Now it's going to give us the option to embed. Right, so first of all, it gives us a URL that we can use to share the data if we just wanted to send it to somebody. It will, here's a nice URL up here that you could send right to someone to see this chart. For our purposes, we want to use this embed code, and we always want to click responsive iframe, and we want to use this responsive iframe. And you can just copy that. That'll give you a little bit of code that you can copy and paste directly into a WordPress post, right into your story in WordPress, right where you want it to appear. And it should display the graphic right there. If you ever have problems pasting an embed code into your story, talk to your editor. Sometimes there are permissions issues. Everybody should have permission to do that, but sometimes the permissions get a little weird, and your editor will definitely have the right permissions and can help you out. And down here we have our options to export the chart as a static graphic, right? So if we do that, we're not going to have all this great interactivity, but it will export it as a nice image, either as a PNG or PDF is generally what you'll want to use. And you can use that to send right to another newspaper for print or to email or whatever you need to do with it. So if we click PNG, which is pretty standard size, right, it'll let us choose the width for our export, a couple other options, and we can just click download PNG. Take a second, then I'll just go ahead and have that open with preview so we can see what it looks like. And it just outputted this nice static graphic for us. So that's really all you need to do to create a nice bar chart with Datawrapper. So let's go ahead and create one more. Next we'll create a line chart using a little bit more complex data. So if we look at this spreadsheet here, this is some data that we collected as part of our Code Red project last year, or in 2019, and we used some sensors that we built to collect indoor heat index from some houses in Baltimore City, and this is the heat index values from one such house that we collected. And then we also have paired that up with the outdoor heat index at that time, which we just collected from a local weather station in Baltimore. So here we've got it broken up in 4-hour increments. So at 7/16/2019 at 12 a.m., 4 a.m., 8 a.m., 12 p.m., 4 p.m., and 8 p.m. And we've got that data for a few really hot days during a heat wave in the summer of 2019. Okay, so we can create a nice line chart with this that'll let people sort of compare the indoor heat out index and the outdoor heat index, which is kind of interesting because as you can see, at many times it was actually hotter inside than it was outside in some of these homes. So again, I'll just copy and paste this data, copy it, and I'll go ahead and paste it right into Datawrapper, and we'll click Proceed, double check to make sure it imported it correctly, which it did. Right, this looks exactly like what we saw in the spreadsheet a second ago, so we're good there. And we'll click Proceed. And again, this is going to go ahead and default to a line chart, which is good in this case. I think that a line chart is probably what we want to go with. It's not a bad idea to click around a little bit to see how your data will look as different chart types. For instance, we could see what this data looked like as a dot plot, which is okay. It's a little bit harder to interpret. It's also going to be interesting range plots, which are going to take the indoor heat index and the outdoor heat index and actually show the differences between them, or even an arrow plot, which will show which direction the trends are sort of going there. But I think in general, the clearest way to let people see this data is with a line chart. And when you're doing graphics, that's what you really want to think about is, how can I most simply impart this information to people so that they understand it? So we're going to go ahead and just use this line chart, and we'll go ahead and click Refine and take a look at some of the options that it gives us. Okay, so, a couple things here. I think the horizontal axis is fine. That's this one down here. You can see it's displaying some of the dates and times from our data, but not every one because there's too many. But you can hover over the lines to see all the data points that were within the data, which is nice. So we'll come back up to the vertical axes because I do want to change that a little bit. But let's go ahead and change the colors, right? So we can, just like before, we can change, we can select a color and Datawrapper will select colors for us, or we can customize individual colors, ourselves if we wanted to do that. So we could make that one purple, and we could make this one red, or whatever we wanted to do. And I think actually I'll just reset them and let them use these two red values for the moment. Okay, so next we can change line width. If we want our lines to be thicker, we just click, or thinner, right? Or we can no line, or we can go back to sort of the default width, which is what I think we'll stick with here. You can also make your lines dashed in a number of different ways if you wanted to do that for some reason, which I don't think we do now. And you can also change the way that the lines are created. So right now, we've got these linear lines, but we can also change them to be curved lines in a number of different ways, which I think is actually kind of interesting here because temperature, does generally operate in these curves, not in these really harsh spikes, right? It tends to go up and down in a more subtle way. We can also fill in the area between lines to sort of highlight the areas in between if our data, gave us a reason to do that, which I don't think it necessarily does right now. Here we can also change, right now it's showing us our labels for our lines sort of here at the end. I think it might be more interesting to have a legend that sort of shows people up at the top what the two different colors mean. We can also change information about our tooltip down here, right? We can change the number format or etc. We've got these line symbols, right? So what we can do here is we can actually, so right now it's putting a dot at the first, a circle at the first and the last point, but since we have a lot of data here, we could actually put it at every point where we have data to let people know, all the places they can explore along these lines, which again, I think is pretty interesting and really visually lets people know where there's data embedded in this chart that they can play with a little bit. And you can make these dots bigger, you can make them smaller, depending on what you think looks good. We'll keep it around 3.5. You can also make them a little opaque if you feel like they're getting in the way a little bit too much. You can also change the shape to be squares or diamonds or triangles or whatever you think is best, but I think the circles look pretty good. So we've really customized this graphic quite a bit. I think it looks pretty nice here. The one thing that's a little weird is we see our data is actually dipping down below our chart and above our chart here, which means that I think the best thing to do for that case is change the horizontal axis a little bit. So here's where this custom range comes into place. So we could make this, instead of starting at 80 and going up to 110, we could make it start at 70 and go up to 120 so that it displays all of our data. Now this still isn't perfect, right? Because now we have some space that's not used. So maybe a better way to do it would be to make it go from 75 to 115. Right now all of our data is included in the graphic without there being a lot of space there. So I think that looks pretty good. Pretty happy with the way that looks. So next we'll go to Annotate and add a little bit of headline and description. So for our headline here, we're going to make it say, indoor and outdoor heat index during Baltimore heat wave. And then we're going to add a little bit of description to let people know more specifically what it is that they're looking at. So recorded on July 16th to 22nd, 2019, indoor data was captured using sensors placed in a second floor bedroom in an unair-conditioned home. Okay, so we're letting people know how we collected the data and when specifically it was recorded. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and add our source. We have a really long source here because we got the data from a few different places. And I'll go ahead and add my byline as well. Okay, so this is really starting to come together. And I think that we don't need to add it to highlight any ranges or anything here. I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. So I'll go ahead and click proceed. I think we'll enable social sharing on here as well. Always a good thing to do. And yeah, I think this graphic is pretty much ready to go. It looks really nice. So we'll go ahead and click publish. And I'll publish the chart. Okay, and again, right, we've got our link that we can share. We've got our responsive iframe embed code that we want to use on the website. We can also export a static graphic if we want to.